The night I understood who my heart belonged to. There was no music playing, no camera waiting, no witness to turn the moment into proof. My name is Keanu Reeves. Even now, saying that name feels like putting on a coat that does not always fit. Because people see it before they see the man shaking underneath it. And you, yes, you, the woman whose silence has followed mine more faithfully than any applause. I need you to hear this before time takes from me the courage I have only just found. There is a reason I am telling you now, and it is not because the world deserves an answer. It is because I have carried one too long. The room was quiet that evening in the way only expensive rooms can be quiet. The glass held the city out bright and distant, as if all those windows belonged to other people's lives. A cup of tea had gone cold beside my hand. I remember the small white ring it left on the table, the kind of mark no one notices until everything else is gone. I had spent years learning how to leave places without disturbing the air. Hotel rooms, movie sets, houses where laughter used to live. I became very good at taking my coat from the back of a chair, nodding once, and walking into the night before anyone could ask me to stay. People called it humility. They called it mystery. They called it peace. But you would have known better. You would have seen the hesitation in my hands when someone spoke too kindly. You would have heard the little pause before I answered questions about happiness. You would have noticed how often I looked toward doors, as if some part of me was always preparing to disappear. That night, I was not disappearing. Not yet. I was sitting near the window, watching move through the dark trees below, and I felt something inside me break with almost no sound. It was not the kind of breaking that throws a man to the floor. It was gentler than that, and somehow worse. A thread coming loose, a locked room opening. A truth standing patiently in the doorway after waiting half a lifetime to be invited in. I had built a life people could recognize from far away. Work, discipline, kindness when I could offer, silence when I could not. I had learned how to be grateful without asking for too much. I had learned how to smile when strangers told me I had meant something to them, even when I could not tell them how often I felt like I meant very little to myself. And then there was you. Not as a headline, not as an answer, not as some shining board placed at the end of a lonely road. You were quieter than that. You were the thought I avoided when morning light came through the curtains too softly. You were the name my heart moved toward before my mind had permission to follow. You were the person I wanted to tell the truth to, and the person I most feared would believe me. For a long time, I told myself I was protecting you from the heaviness of my life. That was the noble version. Men like me become very skilled at making fear sound like mercy. I said I did not want to bring my ghosts into your rooms. I said I did not want to ask anything from you that I could not return whole. But the truth I had avoided was simpler and less honorable. I was afraid that if I let you see me completely, you would look at all the empty places and quietly decide there was too much winter in me. That is where the story changes, though I did not know it then, because once a man admits he has been hiding behind his own tenderness, the hiding place is ruined. The walls no longer protect him. They only echo. And in that echo, I began to hear all the words I had swallowed across the years. Stay. I miss you. I am tired. I do not want to reach the end of this life being admired by many and truly known by no one. There it was. The sentence I had never said aloud. Outside, the city kept burning with its little electric stars. Somewhere below, a car passed over wet pavement. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the old building, settling into itself, my own breath moving unevenly in my chest. I thought of time then, not as an idea, but as something physical. A hand on the shoulder, a slow closing door. I thought of my father's silence, my mother's strength, the friends I had lost, the rooms I had entered young and left older. I thought of all the years I had mistaken endurance for living, and I thought of a future I had never allowed myself to picture clearly. You at a kitchen table in morning light, your hand resting near mine, not asks to be held, just close enough that I could choose courage. Quares, quiet road, somewhere outside the city. Rain on a windshield. 2 cups left in the sink. Maybe laughter from another room. Maybe no children. Maybe only the strange, holy family 2 wounded people make when they stop pretending they are not wounded. I do not know whether such a life is possible. I do not know whether you would open the door if I finally stood before it with nothing in my hands except the truth. But that night, for the first time, I let myself imagine not dying unseen. The cold tea trembled when I reached for it. The confession did not begin when I spoke your name. It began years earlier, in every room where I pretended not to be lonely. My name is Keanu Reeves. I have said it across tables, contracts, introductions, and hotel lobbies. But there are nights when it sounds less like a name and more like a door I am expected to stand behind. And you, the woman I kept closest in thought while keeping far in life, deserve to know what that distance cost me. There is a reason I have to go back before I can come towards you. I used to believe that losing things made a simple slur. I thought grief burned away what was unnecessary. I thought pain would make me honest, cleaned, spare, someone who could walk through the world with fewer needs. It did not happen that way. Loss did not simplify me. It multiplied the rooms inside me. There was the room where I kept my work, the room where I kept my manners, the room where I kept my public gratitude, polished and ready. There was the room for old photographs, the one for names I could no longer say without pausing, and the one I never opened at all because I feared what might still be breathing in there. You may have seen me standing in crowds with that quiet expression people mistake for calm. Maybe you wondered what I was thinking. Most of the time, I was listening for something no one else could hear. A voice gone from the world. A laugh remembered incorrectly. A question I had not answered in time. There is a kind of silence that follows a man after certain losses. It does not shout. It sits beside him in cars. It walks with him through airports. It waits in dressing rooms while someone adjusts a collar around his throat. It becomes so familiar that eventually he stops calling it sadness and starts calling it himself. I did that. I let sadness borrow my face. For years, I gave the world what I could. I showed up. I learned my lines. I rode motorcycles through cold streets before dawn just to feel the air hit me hard enough to prove I was still here. I carried books in my hands and ghosts in my chest. I ate alone more often than people imagined. I went home to houses too clean, too still, too obedient to absence. And when love came near, I stepped back. Not dramatically, never cruelly, I hope. Just enough. A delayed answer, a gentle deflection, a joke made too softly, a glance toward the floor when the conversation became too true. I became a master of almost reaching, almost confessing, almost letting someone rest her head against the part of me that still believed in warmth. Then you appeared in the spaces I had trained myself not to fill. At first, I told myself it was kindness I felt, respect, affection, the safe words men use when the real ones frighten them. I let myself admire you because admiration can stand at a distance and pretend it is noble. I let myself be grateful for you because gratitude asks less than longing. But half through that season of my life, something happened that I did not tell anyone. I was walking alone after midnight, somewhere far from home, though by then I was not sure where home was. The air was cold enough to make each breath visible. The streetlights gave everything a tired gold color. A shop window reflected me back to myself, older than I expected. Shoulders slightly bent, hands in my pockets like I was hiding them from judgment. And I stopped, not because I saw a fan, not because I heard a sound. I stopped because I realized I had been living as though love were something I had already missed. That was the truth I had avoided. I had not been waiting for the right time. I had been waiting for a version of myself untouched by sorrow, and that man was never coming. I had been asking life to return me clean before I dared offer myself to you. But does not do that. Time does not hand a man back to himself without scars. It only asks whether he will bring the scars with him or remain outside the door forever. I stood there in the cold, looking at my own reflection, and for once I did not recognize the actor, the traveler, the man strangers called gentle. I saw a boy who had learned too early that people vanish. I saw a man who had built a fortress out of restraint. I saw someone who wanted, with a force that frightened him, to be invited in. I thought of you then, not as rescue. I would never ask you to be that, but as witness, as the person before whom I might finally set down the weight and not pretend it was a virtue. I imagined your face if I told you the whole of it. The trembling parts, the selfish parts, the years as I wasted confusing solitude with dignity. I imagined you listening without reaching too quickly because you have always understood that some wounds become shy when touched. And then I feared the other image, you turning away gently. Not angry, not unkind, only unable to carry the winter I brought to your threshold. That fear followed me back to the room like a second shadow. Still, something had moved. The future, which had always looked like a corridor of locked doors, showed me on one door with light beneath it. I did not open it. I did not even knock. But I stood there long enough to feel warmth on my feet. The first time I nearly said it, my voice failed me in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. My name is Keanu Reeves. I have spoken in front of crowds, under lights, hot enough to make a man forget his own skin sin. But the smallest truths have always been the ones that frighten me most. And you, the woman sitting inside this memory, like a candle, protected, bracketed from wind, were the one person I could not afford to lie to anymore. There is a reason I must tell you about the day I almost collapsed without anyone noticing. It was not a dramatic day. That is what I remember most. No storm, no terrible phone call, no door slamming shut, only a pale sky, a long table, voices discussing schedules and scenes and obligations that would have sounded normal to anyone standing nearby. Papers moved from one hand to another. Someone laughed politely. A pen rolled toward the edge of the table and stopped before falling. I was there, but I was not there. My body had learned its duties. Sit upright, listen, nod, answer when asked, make the face of a man who understands what is being said. I had perfected that face over so many years that sometimes I feared it would become permanent, like stone left too long in weather. Across the room, a window had been opened a few inches. Cold air slipped through and touched the back of my neck. That small chill did something to me. Carried a memory I was not ready for. Another room, another window, another version of myself, waiting for someone who would never arrive. For a moment, the present thinned. I heard voices, but they came from far away. The table lengthened. The walls seemed to breathe. My hands rested in front of me, and I remember staring at them as if they belonged to someone older, someone I had been hired to portray. Then your name moved through me, spoken aloud, not even fully formed, just there. And with it came such a sudden ache that I had to press my feet against the floor to remain in the chair. No one saw it. That was the strange mercy and the strange cruelty of it. The meeting continued. Pages turned. A phone vibrated against wood. The world, which had never known how to stop for private ruin, kept going. I wanted to stand. I wanted to leave. I wanted to find you, even if only to sit beside you and say nothing at all. I wanted to be near one living soul who did not need me to be composed, but I stayed. I did what I had always done. I folded the breaking thing inside myself and gave the room a quieter version of my attention. Later, when I was alone, I stood in a hallway where the light had gone blue with evening. The carpet swallowed every footstep. At the end of the corridor was an elevator with polished doors, and in those doors, I saw my reflection stretched thin, almost ghost-like. That was when I admitted what I had spent years refusing to admit. I was not strong because I could endure loneliness. I was lonely because I had mistaken endurance for strength. There is a difference. I know it now. Strength would have been calling you. Strength would have been saying, I am not well tonight, without turning the sentence into a joke. Strength would have been allowing my need to exist without dressing it in apology. But I had lived so long inside restraint that tenderness felt reckless, wanting felt dangerous. Hope felt like a room where something precious could be taken again. I leaned one hand against the elevator wall and closed my eyes. For years, people had placed kindness on me like a garment. They said I was good, gentle, humble. I never knew what to do with those words. They warmed me for a moment, then slipped off, because praise cannot enter places a man has locked from the inside. But your quiet belief in me was different. It did not flatter. It waited. And waiting can be more frustrans than no bit, because it gives a man time to become honest. I thought of all the things I had not told you, how certain mornings I woke with grief already sitting on the edge of the bed, how sometimes I drove without a destination because movement felt easier than staying still with myself. How I envied men who complained about ordinary family noise, the shoes by the door, the unfinished cups, the voices calling from another room. Because to me, those sounded like proof that life had trusted them with belonging. I imagined, just for a moment, a different hallway, one where I was coming home instead of leaving, one where a light had been left on, because you knew I would arrive late. One where I could remove my boots quietly and hear you ask, not as a demand, but as a welcome, "Are you here?" And I imagined answering yes. Not the yes I gave to contracts, cameras, obligations, strangers. A yes from the part of Dens that had been absent even while standing in full view. But I did not call you that night. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat, too tired to take it off. The city hummed beyond the glass. Somewhere beneath that hum, I felt the future shifting its weight. The elevator doors closed on my reflection, but not before I saw a man beginning to vanish from his own disguise. The ache became loudest in the places where no one expected me to feel anything at all. My name is Keanu Reeves. I had crossed continents, slept in unfamiliar beds, smiled beneath lights, and answered questions with the careful calm of a man who had learned to keep his deeper life folded small. But you, the woman I kept meeting in my thoughts like a prayer I was afraid to finish, were beginning to reach places in me that travel, work, and silence could no longer cover. There is a reason I need to speak of the search, even if did not know I was searching then. I used to walk at night when the cities became less certain of themselves. Los Angeles, New York, Paris, Berlin. Names changed, but the loneliness stayed strangely fluent. It knew every language. It could find me beneath street lamps, in the back of cars, beside hotel windows, where the curtains moved slightly because the heating was old and uneven. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes after applause. Before it, the body is busy. People touch your shoulder. Someone fixes a microphone. Someone says your name, and another person repeats it. You belong briefly to movement. Then the doors close. The hallway empties. The car takes you somewhere quiet, and suddenly all that noise falls away, leaving the shape of what was never there. A hand waiting. A voice asking if you ate. Someone who knows which silence means peace and which silence means danger. I did not want much, though perhaps that is not true. Perhaps I wanted everything and had trained myself to call it little. I wanted a table that did not feel temporary. I wanted the sound of another person moving through a room without performance. I wanted to be known in the morning, before the face arranged itself. I wanted to come home and not feel like a visitor in my own life. And more than I admitted, I wanted you. Not the idea of you. Not the comforts of placing all my broken hope inside your name. You. Your steadiness, your questions, the way you did not rush to fill silence simply because silence made others nervous. The way your presence seemed to change the temperature of a room without asking anyone to notice. You had a kind of light that did not blind. It stayed low near the floor where a tired man might find his way. Still, I kept moving. Movement had always been easier than confession. A motorcycle on an empty road could almost convince me that freedom and escape were the same thing. Wind against my chest, cold leaking through my jacket, headlights tearing open the dark. There were nights when I rode till my hands ached, not because I had somewhere to go, but because stillness asked questions I could not answer. Then came the moment I could no longer pretend the search was noble. It happened in a small chapel I entered by accident or by something I have never known how to name. Rain had started without warning. I stepped inside to avoid it. There were only a few candles burning near the front, their flames trembling as if they too were unsure they had permission to remain. The air smelled of wax, stone, and old wood. No one recognized me. No one asked anything of me. For once, anonymity felt less like hiding and more like mercy. I sat in the back pew. At first, I thought of nothing. Then I thought of everyone I had lost. Then I thought of you. That was the shift I had been resisting. I realized I had spent years asking grief for permission to love again, as though sorrow were a gatekeeper, as though the dead required my loneliness as proof of devotion, as though refusing happiness could somehow keep faith with what had been taken. But sitting there with rain tapping softly against stained glass, I felt something inside me loosen, not heal. I do not trust that word when it arrives too quickly. But loosen, yes. As if the hand around my throat had remembered it was also capable of blessing. I bowed my head. I did not pray beautifully. I have never been good at beautiful prayers. Mine are usually fragments, names, questions, breathing. That day, I think all I said was, please let me not waste what remains. Please let me tell the truth before my voice becomes too old to carry it. Please let her know I was not careless with what I felt. And then, beneath all of that, the smallest prayer. Please let there still be time. I imagined you beside me in that chapel, not as a vision, not as something wholly beyond reach, but as a woman with rain on her coat and warmth in her hands. I imagine turning to you, wanting to explain everything, failing, and somehow being understood before the words arrived. The future flickered there. Possible and intimate. A house with windows open in spring. Your hair touched by morning light, my hand hesitating near yours, still uncertain, still afraid, but no longer withdrawing. Perhaps a child's drawing on a refrigerator. Perhaps only two aging people laughing softly because the kettle has screamed too long and neither of them moved. I did not know which version life would allow. I only knew that for the first time in many years, the unknown did not feel only like loss. When I stepped back into the rain, the street was shining as if the whole city had been washed for someone else's beginning. The truth found me in the face of someone who did not know she was carrying it. My name is Keanu Reeves. I have lived long enough to fathom that a stranger can sometimes reveal what friends are too kind to name, and that realization still makes me uneasy. And you, the woman whose presence had become the quiet measure of my days, need to know about this because it was the first time I saw my own heart from outside myself. There is a reason this part cannot be skipped. It happened in a place built for passing through. An airport lounge before dawn, somewhere between countries where no one looks fully awake and everyone seems to be waiting for permission to become real again. The lights were too white. The coffee tasted burnt. Rain blurred the windows until the airplanes looked like shadows resting on wet pavement. I sat in a corner with my coat folded beside me and a book open in my hands. Though I had not read the same sentence properly for nearly 20 minutes, across from me, an older woman was trying to fasten a small bracelet around her wrist. Her fingers trembled. The clasp would not catch. A man beside her, maybe her husband, maybe someone who had simply traveled through life long enough to belong beside her, noticed that was without making a show of noticing. He took her hand gently. He did not speak at first. He only held the bracelet, leaned close, and fixed it with the care of someone repairing a sacred thing. When it clicked shut, she touched his sleeve. Not gratitude exactly. Something older than gratitude, familiarity, trust, the quiet knowledge that another person had watched her struggle and stayed near. Not because it was too sentimental, because it was too precise. Life does not accuse you loudly. It does not accuse you loudly, and simply places an image before you and lets you understand what you have been missing. That small gesture entered me like cold air. I thought of you at once. I thought of all the times I had wanted to reach for your hand and had stopped myself. How I had mistaken restraint for respect, silence for protection, distance for wisdom. I thought of the terrible arrogance hidden inside my caution, the belief that I could decide alone what you should be spared, what you could bear, what my love might cost you. The boarding announcements murmured overhead. Wheels clicked across tile. Somewhere, a child began crying, then quieted against someone's shoulder. And still, I could not stop seeing that bracelet, a little circle closing, a life made visible through one ordinary act. That was when I admitted something I had avoided even after the hallway, even after the cold room, and the untouched tea. I had not merely been afraid of losing love. I had been afraid of receiving it. That truth shamed me more deeply than fear itself. Loss, at least, had a noble shadow. Anyone could understand a man who hesitated because he had buried too much hope. But receiving love required another kind of courage. It asked me to stand still while someone saw me. It asked me not to earn tenderness through sufferings, not to repay devotion with usefulness, not to vanish the moment I felt needed. I've always known how to give. Giving allowed me to remain in control. A gift could be offered from a doorway. Kindness could be left on a table while the giver walked away. But to receive, to let someone come close enough to see the cracks, the impatience, the tiredness, the strange little fears that survive inside an aging man, felt almost impossible. Because what if you loved me and I believed you? What would become of the lonely identity I had polished for so long? What would I do with all those rooms inside me if you opened the windows? I closed the book. My hands looked older. In the airport light, there were lines across the knuckles I had not noticed before, small signs of time writing its own confession on my skin. I remembered being young and certain that life would unfold generously if I simply kept moving. I remembered thinking there would always be another season, another chance, another conversation waiting beyond the next arrival gate. Now I knew better. Time is not cruel every day. Some days it is patient. Some days it sits beside you and waits for you to understand that waiting is also a form of loss. I imagined you then not far away and unreachable, but standing at the edge of my life with your coat buttoned against the cold, looking at me as if I had finally come to the right place. I imagined telling you I do not know how to be loved without flinching. I imagined your eyes softening, not with pity, but recognition. Maybe you would say nothing. Maybe you would only take my hand as that man had taken hers and show me that care did not always arrive with speeches. Sometimes it arrived through a clasp fastened, a chair pulled closer, a cup warmed between palms. I wanted that future so suddenly it frightened me. A small house somewhere quiet. Your books mixed with mine. Afternoon light falling across the floor. My motorcycle cooling in the driveway while I chose, for once, not to leave. Your voice from another room calling me by a name that sounded less like a public thing and more like shelter. But I could not yet step into that life. Not while I still treated love like a door I had no right to open. The older woman lifted her wrist to the light, and the bracelet held. The person I had been avoiding was not you. It was the man I became whenever love came close. My name is Keanu Reeves. I have worn armor in films, fallen through glass, stood beneath impossible fires, yet nothing has ever frightened me like the quiet look of someone waiting for me to be honest. and you, the woman I kept approaching in silence and leaving in silence, were not the danger I imagined. There is a reason I need to say that plainly. This lowers when I do. For a long time, I blamed the past because the past could not defend itself. I said grief had made me careful. Said loss had taught me restraint. I said a man who had watched beautiful things disappear should not rush toward beauty again. There was truth in that, but truth can become a hiding place when a man only stands behind the part that makes him look wounded instead of afraid. I began to understand this on a morning when the house felt too large for one person. The sun had come in through the blinds in thin, pale lines, cutting the floor into pieces. Dust moved slowly in the light. Somewhere outside, a bird kept calling with a persistence that almost felt cruel. I had woken early, though there was nowhere I needed to be. That is one of the secret punishments of success, I think. People imagine it fills your days with meaning. Sometimes it only removes your excuses. There are mornings when no one is asking for you, no work is pulling you forward, no noise is loud enough to cover the question waiting beside the bed. Who are you when no one needs you? I sat in the kitchen with my hands around a mug, feeling its warmth fade. The chair across from me was empty, not dramatically empty, not like a scene composed for sorrow, just empty in the ordinary way a chair is empty when no one has lived enough life inside you to leave it. They're pulled back, slightly crooked, touched by habit. I looked at that chair for too long. And I thought of all the times I had made myself, before anyone could discover, I wanted to be reached. I had become skilled at disappearing inside politeness. I answered messages after the moment had cooled. I smiled when I should have asked a question. I let conversations end because ending them required less courage than deepening them. When tenderness entered the room, I stepped aside and called it respect. But respect without risk can become another name for distance. That morning, I understood how much damage a gentleman can do by never telling the truth. Not with cruelty, not with betrayal, simply by withholding part of himself that could have changed everything. And that was the admission I had resisted. I had hurt myself with silence, yes. But I may have hurt you with it too. I do not know what you felt in those pauses. I do not know whether you waited, wondered, gave up, forgave me, or simply continued living to living with more grace than I deserved. I only know that my hesitation was not harmless just because it was quiet. The room seemed to grow colder after that thought. I stood and walked to the window. The street out was still half asleep. A delivery truck moved slowly along the curb. A woman crossed the sidewalk holding a child's hand, bending her head toward him as he spoke. Could not hear the words, but I could see the tenderness in the shape of her listening. It struck me then how much a love is attention, not grand declarations, not sacrifice made visible enough for applause. Attention. The willingness to turn fully toward another life and remain there without looking for an exit. I had given attention to work, to grief, to strangers, to discipline, to memory. I had even given attention to the idea of love. But had I turned fully towards you, the answer came softly and it broke me. No. Not fully. I had loved you in fragments, from doorways, from across rooms, through unsent words and delayed courage. I had let you become the keeper of feelings I never placed in your hands. For the first time, I did not ask whether you would still want me. I asked whether I had become capable of standing still long enough to be wanted. That question changed the light around everything. Because the future I feared was no longer only about rejection. It was about arrival. What if I came to you and had no performance left? What if I said your name and the years stood between us like witnesses? What if you looked at me and saw not as a legend, not a survivor, not a quiet man strangers praised, but someone late, trembling, and finally true? I imagined us older than hope usually allows, walking slowly beside a body of water while evening gathered around us. Your sleeve, brushing men, no cameras, no borrowed lines. Just wind our wand, breathing, and the strange courage, enough time of two people pretending not to need tenderness. I imagined a home where silence did not mean absence, but I did not yet know if I deserved to cross that threshold. The chair remained empty behind me, waiting like a question life had not finished asking. Hope returned to me in the smallest possible way, which is how I knew it was real. My name is Keanu Reeves. I have distrusted hope for most of my life, not because it was foolish, but because it asked me to become visible again. And you, the woman I had loved from behind so many locked doors, were the first person I thought of when that small light appeared. There is a reason I need to tell you about it before I tell you what I did next. It was late afternoon, the hour when sunlight begins to lose its confidence. I was in a room I had been in many times before, though that day it felt unfamiliar, as if some quiet rearrangement had taken place while I was not looking. A window stood open. Cool air moved the curtain in slow breaths. On the table, there were scattered pages, a pair of glasses, a book turned face down, and one envelope I had not yet opened. Nothing extraordinary. That was what unsettled me. For years, I had expected change to arrive with force. A collision, a storm, a hand grabbing my shoulder in the dark. But hope came almost politely. It entered through the open window with the pale light and sat down across from me as if it had been invited. I remember touching the envelope without opening it. My fingers rested on the paper, and suddenly I thought of all the things a man can postpone until post-moment becomes his life. Letters unwritten, calls not made, names held in the mouth but never released. A door approached, then passed by. A truth rehearsed in the mirror, then abandoned when another day offered the comfort of delay. I had lived that way longer than I wanted to admit. And still, beneath all the fear, something in me had begun to lean forward. I thought of you not as someone lost, not as someone impossible, but as someone living under the same sky at the same hour. Perhaps you were near a window too. Perhaps the light had touched your hands. Perhaps you were carrying your own silence, your own questions, your own careful strength. That thought changed the room. It made the distance between us feel less like a wall and more like a road. Then came the realization I had avoided because it frightened me more than grief. Hope was not a betrayal of what I had lost. I had treated it that way for years, as if allowing myself to want a future meant I had become careless with the past. But love does not ask the dead to vanish. It does not erase the names we carry. It only asks whether those names must be carried alone. I sat very still after that. There are moments when a man does not cry because he is broken, but because something inside him has survived longer than he expected. That afternoon, I felt the old places in me answer to light. Not loudly, not healed, but awake. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the trees moved in the wind with that patient, bending strength trees have, yielding without surrendering. A neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, and the sound rose into the air with such sudden brightness that I had to close my eyes. I imagine telling you this, not in a speech, not with the elegance people sometimes expect from a man who has spent his life around words written by others. I imagined failing at it, starting once, stopping, trying again. Looking away because your face would make honesty harder and easier at the same time. I imagine saying, I think I have been afraid to hope because I thought hope would ask too much of you. And maybe you would understand that what I meant was I feared my hope would become a burden in your hands. But the future I saw then was not heavy in that way. It was quieter. You and I walking through a market early in the morning, choosing fruit neither of us needed. Your shoulder touching mine in a narrow aisle. My hand reaching for yours without turning the gesture into a question. Rain beginning, both of us standing beneath an awning while the street darkened and shone. No one watching. No one needing a story from us. Only time, ordinary and generous for once. I saw a small table set for two. I saw your coat hanging beside mine. I saw myself growing older without becoming more hidden. And I wanted that with such tenderness that it almost hurt to breathe. But wanting is not the same as deserving. Imagining is not the same as arriving. I knew there were still words between us, years between us, silences that would not disappear because I had finally named them. Hope had entered the room, yes, but it had not answered for me. It had only placed a match in my hand. I opened the envelope at last. Inside's nothing that would matter to anyone else. Just a note, brief and practical, about a meeting, a date, a place I could choose to attend or avoid. But my hand stayed over it as if it were something sacred, because for the first time in years, I understood that a place could become a beginning if a man arrived honestly. The curtain lifted once in the wind, and the whole room seemed to inhale. I finally understood that my heart did not belong to the past or to grief or to the silence that had guarded me for so long. My name is Keanu Reeves. I say it now not as a shield, not as a name borrowed by strangers, but as a man standing closer to the edge of his own truth than he ever expected to stand. And you, the woman whose presence had become the quiet place my life kept turning toward, deserve to hear what happened when I stopped walking around the door. There is a reason this confession has taken me so long to reach. I went to that meeting with no promise that anything would change. The morning was gray, almost colorless, with low clouds resting over the city like a hand that could not decide whether to comfort or press down. I remember the pavement shining faintly from rain that had fallen before dawn. I remember the collar of my coat brushing my jaw. I remember feeling older than my reflection in the glass doors. Inside, people spoke politely. Chairs shifted. Coffee cooled in paper cups. The world continued arranging itself around appointments and names and careful smiles. But I was somewhere else. I was listening to the sound inside my own chest, that uneven, stubborn rhythm that had carried me through every room I thought would finish me. I had spent so many years surviving that I had almost forgotten survival was not the same as arrival. Then I saw you, not dramatically. You did not enter with the light behind you.
No music rose.
No one turned to witness the moment. You were simply there, near a window, your face touched by the pale morning, your hands folded loosely, as if you were holding patience itself. And all the words I had rehearsed abandoned me. That is the cruelty of truth. Sometimes it waits until you are ready, then removes your performance. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell you everything at once. The cold rooms, the roads, the chapel, the airport bracelet, the empty chair, the envelope, the years I confused distance with kindness. I wanted to place the whole broken map of my life before you and say, this is how long it took me to find my way here. Instead, I only said your name, quietly. Almost as if I were afraid the room might take it from me. You looked at me then, and there was no accusation in your eyes. That nearly undid me. I had prepared for hurt, for distance, for the careful mercy of someone who had learned to live without waiting. But I had not prepared for your stillness. I had not prepared for the way you seem to understand that some men arrive late, not because they loved lightly, but because they were lost in rooms no one else could see. That was when I admitted the final thing. I had not been searching for the woman. I had been searching for the courage to stand before the woman I loved without asking my sorrow to explain me. The difference was everything. Because you were not a cure. You were not an ending to grief. You were not the reward life owed me after taking too much. You were a living soul with your own wounds, your own silences, your own mournings, when light must have felt too heavy to carry. And if my heart belonged to you, it could not be as a burden laid at your feet. It had to be as an offering, imperfect, late, trembling, true. I do not remember the conversation exactly. I remember fragments, your breath, the warmth of the room, A car passing outside through wet streets. My hand resting on the table, not reaching yet, but no longer hiding. I remember telling you I had been afraid. Not in a beautiful sentence, not cleanly. The words came unevenly, like stones pulled from deep water. And you listened. That was all. That was everything. For a moment, I saw the future come near, not guaranteed, not promised, not softened into a fairy tale, but near enough to feel its weather. I saw us walking beneath trees when autumn had begun to loosen the leaves. I saw a house where the windows stayed open in the evening. I saw your books leaning against mine, 2 cups cooling, side by side, a door I did not have to leave through. I saw myself old, not hidden. I saw you turning toward me when the wind rose. And still, I did not ask the future to answer. Not yet. Because some things must begin without being possessed. Some confessions are not keys, they are candles. They do not open the whole house at once. They only show the next step, and perhaps that is mercy. So I stood there with you in the pale morning, no longer admired from a distance by the world, no longer safe inside my solitude, no longer pretending I did not long to be known. The rain had stopped outside, but every window still held the light like something waiting to be born.